Welcome back to the Arch Advocate podcast. Sorry this episode's coming in a little bit late. I changed my studio. I moved my recording little setup into a different room, so that's what I was doing all morning, getting ready for the new baby, and simultaneously winter. This is going to be a fun one, folks. A couple things. I wanted to further address the Jordan B. Peterson thing, because as I told you guys, Owen Benjamin has a really good take on it. I would say he's a little bit more angry about it than I am, but I also wanted to kind of tie this in to another recommendation. As I told you guys before, I'm in a position where it's like I can filter through a lot more stuff that's on YouTube and whatnot, and news articles, and kind of give you like some helpful pointers. Is like, well, if you kind of like what I'm into, then I think you're gonna like this sort of thing. But Stefan Molyneux, who I'm also a fan of, did a really eye-opening piece for me, and this is just posted a day or so ago, called "The First Temptations of Christ." Now, I am going to tie this into Jordan B. Peterson and everything else that we're talking about, but I strongly recommend that you go watch not just Owen Benjamin's stuff for the last 2 days, the last 2 posts that he's done. And if you're watching this, further into the future, from the future, then just look at the date that I post this video, and then, subtract a day or two on Stefan Molyneux's YouTube page, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But it's called the First Temptation of Christ. Now, I like this for a number of reasons, but the first and most glaring reason is that Stefan Molyneux is an atheist. He is what I would call a real atheist, or a true atheist, right? Which there are very few of. Most people, when they say I'm an atheist, what they are really saying is I am an anti-theist. Or another way of saying that is I believe in God very much, and I'm very disappointed in him or whatever God is. That's usually like, look, I tell Christians, like, look, do this, you test this theory, right? You test this and see if it doesn't work every single time. I do this all the time. Like, you go out, like if you're a Christian, you go out, when you meet new people, right? Get it resolved in your mind to not bring up the subject of Jesus Christ or Christianity, right? Like, have a mental goal in your mind, like, do not bring this subject up. And the reason why is because the second part of this this test, if you will, is to see how long it takes until the other person does. It always works. Always. And it usually doesn't take very long. People want to talk about it, and not talk about religion, but talk about Christianity and Jesus Christ in particular. When you run this test, right, it won't take you very long until you start asking yourself, like, why is it that these people keep bringing up Jesus Christ on their own? They don't bring up Muhammad. They don't bring up Buddha. They don't bring up Krishna. You know what I mean? None of it. None of the other, gods or belief systems or whatever. It's always, I'm an atheist. Now I cannot wait to talk about Jesus Christ with you, complete stranger, who has not even given me any indication that you have any thoughts on the subject. It's bizarre, right? And I could go into that. Maybe I shall. No, I'm not going to. But Stefan Molyneux is a he's obviously a modern day philosopher, right? Stand up philosopher. Name that movie. Come on, creeps. Name that movie. Comicus. Stand up philosopher. Oh, you mean a bullshit artist? I'm a big fan of Stefan Molyneux, and he just did this piece called "The First Temptation of Christ," and So I already told you, like, the first reason I want to talk about this is because it's Stefan Molyneux. He's a guy that's like, look, I'm just seeking the truth, and I'm an atheist, but man, Christianity really, I get it. I just, I still have a lot of questions that needs to be answered. Like, that's a true atheist. That's a guy, atheist. It means, that word it's, in its context, it means neutral, or without but not against. It just means there's a void here. And then theo is God, or the study of God. And he's saying, I'm an atheist. And he just lays out this speech that he was giving, this talk that he was giving, called The First Temptation of Jesus Christ. And the second reason I wanted to talk about this is because I've told you guys, like, I've been listening to sermons, good sermons and bad sermons, my whole life. Since I was 2 years old, I've been in churches. Obviously I don't remember the sermons from when I was 2, but I've heard them all. I've heard hundreds of different pastors and theologians, guys like Ravi Zacharias and I mentioned yesterday Billy Graham, and the list, I've read them all. C.S. Lewis and D.L. Moody and all these people. Like, I've read all the books, and I've heard all the sermons. I've heard every possible, well, not every possible. Every once in a while something will catch me off guard, and I'll be like, oh, I never thought of it that way before. Most of the times now, as a man who's been sitting in church his whole life, who was 45 years old, I look at, and I'll listen to sermons, and I'll say to myself, like, yeah, I've heard this one before. I've heard this perspective before, right? Or I've heard this garbage before, right? And I have heard some garbage from over the pulpit, where it's just, I'll give you, here's a good example. Like, one thing that's common for me when I go to churches, if I'm, listening to my own pastors, or listening to, pastors that I've never sat under before. Like, one thing that I've heard and will continue to hear, right, this will never stop, is you will hear pastors saying a lot, and even pastors that, like, I still trust to this day, right? I have a friend, good friend, his name's David. I'm not going to go any further than that, but he's in Romania right now. He actually has my Bible. When I left the United States the last time, I left my Bible with him, because I've had that Bible since I was 16, and it's not replaceable, right? There's no, it's that particular version of the King James Bible is out of print. All of my notes are in it, you know what I mean? And he has that Bible. But anyways, even this guy, who I love and I respect, and I really admire, like, the way that he approaches scripture and the way that he talks about it, even I've heard him say, right? Just like you've heard a million other pastors say, is like, they'll always say, like, well, the thing that Jesus talked about the most was money, right? The thing that Jesus talked about most in his sermons was money. If you take all of the words in red and boil it down to the subject matter, then the thing that Jesus Christ talked about the most was money. And it's like, dude, that's not true. It's not true. That's not factually correct, nor is it true. It is neither factual nor truthful. There is no set of certain. It's like, okay, let's do this. Let's go one by one. Let's take just verse by verse. Let's go through the scriptures and find out what Jesus was talking about. What those people do, what they teach those people in seminary, and what they come to understand is that anytime Jesus is using economics as a teaching tool to illuminate the point that he's trying to get to, they say, oh, he's talking about money. And it's like, well, clearly he's not talking about money. He's using an economic principle to illuminate something, but that's not the same thing as talking about money. In fact, there are, I believe, two or 3 actual times where he's talking about actual money, and in every single one of those contexts, when he's talking about actual currency, it's not favorable, right? Jesus did not have a very high opinion of mankind's need, for fiat currency and the acquisition of wealth and all that sort of thing. But when a pastor reads the kingdom of heaven is like a man who went out into a field and he found a buried treasure. So he went back into town with his newfound treasure, and he sold all of his worldly belongings. He sold his home, and he sold the treasure that he found. And he took all that money, and he went out and he bought that piece of land. It's like, that's, it's a parable. But, these people that study this sort of thing, it's like, what they see in that is there's money, right? There's treasure, and then he went and sold all of his things and, got together a big pile of money, and then he went and he bought the land and all that sort of thing. But it's like, dude, he's not talking about money. He's talking about, the point of that story is like, look, number one, you have to ask yourself, well, why is that guy digging around in some strange field to begin with? Why was there buried treasure there? By the way, these are all things that I can answer. I'm not going to at this moment, for another time. But why was there buried treasure there? Why was he off in some strange field just rooting around in the dirt looking for buried treasure? Right? And Jesus is saying, look, the kingdom of heaven is like this. Like, if you know that there's hidden treasures, then you need to do everything that you can to stay in that land where you can just continue to dig up treasures, right? But it's not money. You know what I mean? He's using an economic principle, but he's clearly not talking about money, right? And every time that Jesus is using some sort of analogy that involves, some sort of economic principle, or using treasures or money as a way to illustrate the point that he's trying to teach on, he's not actually talking about money, right? When he says the kingdom of heaven is like in this case, in this parable, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who found a buried treasure in the field. So clearly, since Jesus prefaced the whole thing with the kingdom of heaven is like, clearly whatever it is that comes out of his mouth next isn't about the thing that is like something. It's about the thing, which is the kingdom of heaven. The thing that Jesus Christ spoke about the most, and nearly exclusively, was the kingdom of heaven. As a matter of fact, that's the gospel. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is within your reach. It's at hand. And every time you see a parable, he says the kingdom of heaven is like da da da. So no matter what he says after that, it's like, well, what he's talking about is the kingdom of heaven, because that's how the sentence starts. And that's the relevance of language. And you know what I mean? But wow, kind of went off the deep end there. My point in all of that is, like, dude, it drives me nuts when I hear pastors saying, the thing that Jesus Christ talked about the most was money. And I hear it all the time. And I've learned to just kind of keep my mouth shut at this point, because it's like, I'm not going to change these people. God knows I have tried. But I'm never going to get these. I can't get my friend Dave, my pastor friend Dave. I'm like, dude, can't you, I don't understand where we're losing each other here. Jesus just said the kingdom of heaven is like, and then he used a bunch of economic or whatever things to illustrate his point. But the subject, the thing that Jesus is talking about, is not the thing that he just said, well, it's kind of like this. It's about the kingdom. And I can't get that guy to change his mind. So it's like, all right, well, I guess we're just not going to talk about it then. Because you can't see it from my point of view, and I cannot see it from your point of view. I used to see it from your point of view, but I don't see it that way anymore. So the point is like, look, I've heard a lot of sermons. I hear stupid things. I hear misguided things. I hear whatever. I've heard it all. I've heard it all is the point. I have heard it all until today, when I heard an atheist talking about the first, the temptation of Jesus Christ in the wilderness. I had never, this is why I want you to go listen to Stefan Molyneux's speech on this. I've never heard anything like it. It absolutely gave me a new understanding of that particular passage. I'm not going to say like a correct one or an incorrect one or whatever, just he framed this conversation in a way that I had never heard it framed like that before. And I've heard a lot of sermons from well-qualified people, right? Stefan Molyneux goes into this whole thing where it's like, Jesus goes into the desert, he fasts for 40 days, and then after the 40 days, like, Satan comes and he tempts him with, the first thing is like, well, if you're the Son of God, then why don't you make that, turn that stone into a loaf of bread? And then, Satan takes him up to the top of a temple and says, well, if you're the Son of God, why don't you throw yourself off of the top of this temple? Because the Bible says, or the Torah says, or whatever, that, that God will give his angels charge over you and you won't dash your foot or hit your head on a stone. Right? And then the third temptation is that, Satan takes him to a high mountain and says, well, if you bow down and worship me, I'll give you all the kingdoms of the earth, right? So I've heard every possible, probably every possible way that sermon can be preached, and what the relevance is of this and that, and what's the relevance of the stone, and what's the relevance of the bread, and what's the relevance of the, the kingdoms of the earth, and if you bow down to me. Like, I've heard it all until today. Where Stefan Molyneux says, well, look at it this way, right? And that's pretty much all I want out of a preacher, right? When I listen to sermons, or if I read a book, or if I, whatever, it's like, really, like, please, just let me have a thought that I've never had before. Let me have something to consider that I've never considered before. Teach me something that somebody else hasn't already taught me. And, at this point in my life, and when it comes to like listening to other people, it's like, that's kind of a rare thing. Christianity is very commercialized now, and everybody's kind of on the same page. And what comes with that is a lot of people, there's not a lot of original thought anymore, right? There are no, shoot. Sorry, I was just thinking of, gosh darn it. I'm sorry that I can't share my thought with you because I can't remember the guy. Starts with an S. He had a beard. Gosh darn it. But like every time I read John, oh, never mind. But every time I read something of his, even if it's something I've read like a million times, it'll be like, whoa, that's fresh and new. Like this, John. Oh, never mind. I know there's like 100 Christians right now going, it's this guy's name, and whatever. But Stefan Molyneux, it's like he said, like, the way that he looked at it is like, well, think of it like this, right? The devil is socialism, right? Think of the devil as the state, right? And the state is here to give you all a whole bunch of free stuff. And he says, well, well, if you're the Son of God, why don't you turn the bread, or turn the stone into bread? Like, he doesn't say like, I'm the devil and I'm powerful and I'm going to turn this into food so that you can eat it now that you're hungry. He's like, no. Why don't you do it? Right? Like, I'm here to challenge your authority by telling you what to do. And it's like, oh my God, that's totally what government does. Once it goes corrupt, that's exactly what government does. And then he just goes on and on from there. Like, I just finished this up like an hour ago. And I was listening to it as I was, rebuilding my little studio here. Absolutely blew my mind. I was like, whoa, I've never heard that before. I've never considered that before. I'm not saying it's theologically correct or anything like that. I'm just saying, like, thank you, Stefan Molyneux. If it were not for you, I would have never have considered that on my own. Right? I wouldn't have made that connection. And this is the importance of listening to other people. And this is how this ties into the Jordan B. Peterson thing from yesterday, because it goes even deeper. It's like, look, I'm never going to look to Stefan Molyneux for spiritual advice when it comes to my relationship to Jesus Christ and God the Father. Right? I will look to him for advice. I will maybe even look to him for spiritual advice, but never when it's like specifically like, okay, this is a Jesus Christ versus Pete Dobson thing, and I'm really struggling with this, and whatever. Like, I'm never going to pull up his videos and try to find the answer, because that's not his place. And I know that that's not his place because he has made his place very clear, right? There's no muddying up of the waters. Stefan Molyneux has his place, and if he wants to change that place, then he has to announce it, right? If Stefan Molyneux gets visited by an angel in the night, or on his road to Damascus, or whatever, then if he wants to change his direction, then he's got to come out on a YouTube video and be like, surprise everybody, I am a follower of Jesus Christ, and that's what my show is going to be about from now on. He's free to do that, but I'm just saying, like, that's not who he is. And therefore, I don't expect that from him, and neither do you. So whenever he talks about atheism, and his or the fact that he's an atheist, it doesn't offend me because he's already told me. I already know what to expect, and I know, like, if he puts something on my plate for me to consider and to consume, then I know, like, well, there's going to be some things on this plate that I'm just not going to want to eat. It's not appetizing for me. I don't care about your atheism. I do care about your other points of view, but your atheism, it's like, not for me. And I don't have to eat everything on my plate. I only have to eat the things off of my plate that I'm hungry for and that I want, and that my stomach can handle, metaphorically. Right? That's one thing in Christianity that it doesn't get taught a lot, is, because the Apostle Paul said, like, milk is for children and meat is for grown-ups, and it's like, you people are supposed to be grown-up Christians now. You're supposed to be eating the meat of this word, but you're still like babies. You're just still drinking the milk, right? But there's another way of teaching that where it's like, hey man, like, you need to eat what's on your plate. There's a lot of people in Christianity that are they're just worrying about, like, who the Antichrist is, and, like, is salvation, is it predestined, or is it, by grace alone, or is it, sola scriptura, or sola, whatever, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, dude, is that what God has on your plate right now? God is telling you that you need to figure out who the Antichrist is. That's what he put on your plate. I see. Christians worry about a lot of things where when I listen to them talking about it, it's like, you should probably just concentrate on what God has on your plate right now. You know what I mean? I'm still struggling with, a lot of things, but here's one, for example, right? I'll give you a good example. And then I'm going to try to remember to come back to Stefan Molyneux and Jordan Peterson. But, if you asked me, because I have atheist friends, Fat Sachs is an atheist, and, a number of other people. And some atheists, we just had Bryce, we were emailing back and forth, and he doesn't identify as an atheist, but certainly not a Christian, and he just went hunting the other day. But, like, people like that will ask me respectfully, they're not being disrespectful, they're just curious. Like, Pete, do you really believe, all that stuff in the book? Do you believe that God parted the Red Sea right down the middle, and that 6 million Jews or 4 million or whatever it was walked across the middle of that ocean on dry land, right? Do you believe that? Do you believe that Jonah, lived for 3 days in the belly of the whale, right? Do you believe that Joshua called out to the sun and said, "Sun, stand still," and that the sun, did what he said, and that there was another 12 hours of daylight? And my answer is always the same. I always say, "Hey, listen, brother, dude, that's not even half of the crazy shit I believe. Yes, I believe all of that stuff. Yes. I believe that a female bear ate like 70 kids because they were picking on Elisha for being bald. All of it. All the crazy stuff that's in this book, I believe it all. What do you believe? What's the crazy shit you believe? Right? You don't ridicule me because I believe shit that's very difficult to believe? What about you? What's the crazy shit you believe? Well, I believe in science. Really? You know how many things are being taught right now in universities, prominent universities, which have already been proven to be false, and they teach it anyways? Oh yeah, I'm the crazy one. Right? You want to get into that mix up with me, I'm telling you. Like, it's not, you're not going to walk away with any sort of feeling of victory or superiority. I can have that conversation with anyone at any time. Like, I can sit here and rattle off things that they teach as unquestioned science. Like, this is settled science. Like laws of thermodynamics type science. And it's like, no, actually, not only are those things not settled, they've been proven to be inaccurate and false. I can do that, right? But you want to get into one really crazy thing, we'll go back to the story of Jonah in the belly of the whale for 3 days. It's a crazy story, right? It's a crazy story. But that's not the craziest part of that story. That's what's right on the surface. That's the hardest. It's almost as like it's a gag. Because the hardest part of that story is the end. You go look up the Book of Jonah and just read the last 2 verses of that book. And you'll notice that book doesn't end. It just stops. It's like, who was that famous composer that literally died while he was writing a song? And his scribble, you could see where he died. Was it Mozart, or it was one of those guys? He was writing another masterpiece of a symphony or whatever, and then he started dying, but he wouldn't take his pen off of the paper, and so you can literally the piece of paper is still, they've archived it, they put it behind glass, and they're like, look, this is the very moment this guy died, right? Because you can see the little scribble marks on the paper. That's how the Book of Jonah is, kind of. Is it like he's just talking, and we know that it's Jonah who actually wrote this book, which isn't true of every book. It's like, there's 4 Gospels of Jesus Christ. Guess how many Jesus actually wrote? 0. Right? Well, there's a lot of books in the Bible where it's like the name of the book wasn't, like Jeremiah, for example. Jeremiah did not write the Book of Jeremiah. His understudy, or his assistant, if you will, his name was Baruch. Baruch wrote that book because he was very close to Jeremiah, whatever. So, Jonah is in a category of what are called the minor prophets. And Jonah wrote his own book. So, you have to know that going in, that this book is different in the sense that the guy who's named, for the book, right, Jonah, he actually wrote this. And you have to understand that, in those times, just like it is right now, you wouldn't just stop in the middle of the story. That's the Book of Jonah. It just stops right in the middle of the story. right? There was way more that happened after that, and we'll never know what it was because Jonah just stopped writing it. And why did he stop writing it? Because the subject, when he stopped writing, was what an absolute knucklehead he was. Here's the story of Jonah, right? Israel, this was a long time ago, right? Hundreds of years before Christ. And, so try to keep in mind, like, this is before anything, you know what I mean? This is before plumbing. This is before, electricity. It's before everything. Nobody knows how to read. You know what I mean? Like back then, 2,000, 2,500 years ago, whatever, people were savages, right? And here's Israel right there in the Mediterranean, and there's this group of people, this nation of people called the Ninevites, and they lived in Nineveh. And Nineveh was a massive city, right? It's believed to be about 60 miles long from side to side, right? It says it would take 3 days journey to get from one end of the city to the other, and a normal pace for normal people is about 20 miles a day. Nineveh was a huge city, and those people, the Ninevites, they were savages, very violent people, as were just about everybody on the planet. People were savage back then, and horribly violent, right? There were very few like peaceful like tribes of people. And by very few, I mean like none. Even the Jews, you know what I mean? Like they weren't, they weren't without their battles. Like they fought and whatever. But Nineveh was particularly violent and particularly brutal, and they had a particular distaste for Jews. And they picked on Israel quite a bit. Killed a lot of Israelites, right? And God comes to Jonah and he says, listen, I'm going to kill these Ninevites. I'm going to wipe out Nineveh. And, I'm going to have this one last ditch effort. I'm going to send them a prophet. I'm going to send you to go and carry my word to them. And the word is repent. You need to turn from your ways and stop being such assholes and quit being so violent. Stop sacrificing children to your, false god, because that was another thing. They were worshipers of Moloch. You have to stop doing all that and change your ways. And Jonah, he's very, in this book that he's writing, now keep in mind, he's writing this book, so he is exposing all of the things that he's like ashamed of, right? Like the whole point of the book of Jonah is like he was very disobedient to God. And then when he finally did obey God, like this miraculous thing happened, right? The Ninevites repented, and then Jonah was very upset about it, and he wanted to kill himself because he was so angry at God for forgiving those people. Jonah hated Nineveh as well as everybody else did. Jonah hated Nineveh and the Ninevites, and his entire nation did as well. And so he goes, right? He goes, and then he gets thrown off of the ship, and then the whale eats him, and 3 days later he gets spit up on the shores, and so he goes into Nineveh. And it even says, like, even his preaching, he was like, all right, when I get into Nineveh, they're just going to kill me. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to go in there with my middle fingers up, and I'm just going to tell these punks, like, I'm not going to be nice to them. I'm just going to tell them, like, hey, listen, Nineveh, I know you're going to kill me, but whatever. I just want you to know that God is about to kill you because he hates you. And, I'm pretty happy. I know that I'm going to be dead here in just a few minutes, but I'm very happy to tell you that God is just about to kill you unless you repent. What was that last part? I said, unless you repent. What? Speak up. Can't hear you in the back. I said, unless you repent. And somehow they all repented. They all turned from their ways and began to worship God. And this was Jonah's, like, if you read the last chapter, chapter 4, it says, but this displeased Jonah exceedingly. Jonah was very upset that these people repented and that God, spared them. And the Lord said, isn't this what I said, when you were, yet in your own country? This is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish, for I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful and slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and relenting from disaster. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me. That's he's asking for permission to kill himself. For it is better for me to die than to live. This is a guy that just witnessed, like God told him, I'm going to kill these people unless they change their ways. Right? And so he went and he preached God's kingdom and justice, and they changed their ways. And this is Jonah's response. He's like, I'm so angry at God that I want to have permission to terminate my own life. I'm so angry about this. This sucks. Hey God, you made the wrong decision, is what he's saying. For it is far better for me to die than to live. And the Lord said, do you do well to be angry? Now keep in mind, Jonah is writing this. He's writing this down knowing that somebody at some point in the future is probably going to read it. And he's telling everybody, like, I had this really hard struggle with God, and this is what God told me. He whispered into my ear and said, do you think you're doing well to be angry? You think this is helping? Like all this anger that you have at me and the Ninevites, like you think you're doing well? So Jonah went out of the city and sat on the east of the city, and he made a booth for himself, and he sat under the shade until he should see what was going to become of the city. And so the Lord God appointed a plant, and we all kind of assume it's like a gourd. And he made the plant to come up over Jonah so that it might be shade over his head to save him from the discomfort. Right? So Jonah, here we see Jonah witnessing a miracle. So Jonah was exceedingly glad because of the plant. But when the dawn came up the next day, God appointed a worm that attacked the plant, so it withered. And when the sun rose, God appointed a scorching east wind, and the sun beat down on the head of Jonah. So keep in mind, if it was coming from the east, that means it wasn't coming in off of the ocean. It would have been a hot wind, a hot and dry, dirty wind. So that Jonah was faint, and he asked that he might die and said, so again, he's saying, like, God, please just let me die. It is better for me to die than to live. And God said to Jonah, do you think you do well to be angry at this plant? Like, you're angry that I gave you this plant yesterday to protect you from the sun, and now I've taken it away from you, and you think you're doing well to be angry at this plant. Like Jonah, it's like God is saying, Jonah, can you hear yourself right now? You're sounding like a retard. And Jonah, years later or months later or decades later, he writes this book, and he tells us about what an asshole he was being. Right? He's giving us insight into what an asshole, and he's a prophet, by the way. Right? He is a holy man. And he realizes as he's writing this book, like, what a dick he was being. Because he's telling us, like, God was calling me out on what an asshole I was being. Do you do well to be angry at the plant, he said. And Jonah said, yes. Yes, I do. I do well to be angry. Angry enough to die. And the Lord said, you pity the plant, for which you did not labor, nor did you make it grow, which came into being in a night and perished in a night. And should I not pity Nineveh, that great city where there are more than 120,000 people who do not know their right hand from their left? And also, there's a lot of cattle there. Question mark. The end. That's where it ends. That's how this book ends. Jonah just stops writing it. Right? We know that because, it ends with God asking him a question and we don't get the answer. Evidently, it was too much for Jonah. He didn't want to write about it anymore. It's not the belly of the whale that's the surprising part of the book of Jonah. It's the fact that this holy man had the presence of mind to share his struggle, to share this very uncomfortable truth about himself and about who he was as a man. Nobody wants to be the focal point of public shame. But here's Jonah doing exactly that. He's like, listen, I had this transaction with God and I'm very ashamed of myself. I'm ashamed of my behavior. Right? I question the will of God. And at the very end, he says, listen, there's 120,000 people in Nineveh that don't know their left hand from their right. Now, again, I've heard a bazillion different sermons about what that means. And I don't know which one is right. Some say that, oh, Pete, in a sermon they'd say there's 120,000 people there that are just stupid. But I don't think that that's what that means. Because there's other words that could have been used for that. I believe that what it means is that there was 120,000 people there that were so young, right? People that were, 3 years old or less, or 2 years old or less, right? I have a 1-year-old baby. He doesn't know his left hand from his right. His mother and I don't know if he's left-handed or right-handed yet, right? 120,000 people is who don't know their left hand from their right is probably what he's probably actually saying is there's 120,000 people there that are they're babies. And if you look at the progression, like the normal exponential growth of any society, it's if there was 120,000 people there, then there would be a couple of million people in the city. It would have been a big city. And God is asking Jonah, he's saying Jonah, there's 120,000 brand new babies that haven't done anything. Are you saying that you would be happy if I wiped them all out? There's a lot of people there that have never, they haven't even learned their first words yet. They don't know if they're left-handed or right-handed yet. Right? And there's a lot of cattle there. It's a good land. And that's where the story ends. Right? So when people ask me oh, you believe that Jonah lived in the belly of the whale for 3 days, it's dude, yeah, I believe that because that's the least difficult thing to believe in that story. The idea that Jonah, a holy man, a man who was regarded as a prophet, sits down and expresses on paper his fight with God that he lost, right? He struggled with God, and it turned out as God very gently and consistently does, is you're always going to learn where you are the asshole. And Jonah shares this with us. That's the part that's hard for me to believe, not the whale thing. So getting back to Stefan Molyneux and Jordan B. Peterson. The point that I was saying is because I got some messages that were well, why didn't you spend more time actually quoting what Dr. Peterson actually said? And the thing is because it doesn't matter. That wasn't the point of what I was trying to get at. I don't care what he said because I don't look to Jordan B. Peterson for illumination on Christianity, nor do I look to him for illumination on how a government is supposed to work. When he talked about Brett Kavanaugh stepping down, it's yeah, dude, you're speaking out of school. I'm not going to listen to this. Right? Yes, I think that Dr. Peterson is going through some very difficult things, some very unnatural things. A year and a half ago, he was just a dude, right? He was probably making a little bit of dough from Google. You know, because he had millions of views on his YouTube channel. He was probably making a little bit of money, but he was a guy that he had a certain amount of fame. He had taught at Harvard. He was respected in intellectual circles. He's a professor at Toronto, right? He's a smart guy. He had a certain amount of street cred in his circle, but not fame, not like, the level of fame that he got since the Joe Rogan show. All of a sudden he gets catapulted into the bright, spotlight, and everybody knows his name, and everybody's calling him a Nazi and blah blah blah, and he's the #1 bestseller author, whatever. It's like that's a level that mankind is just simply not equipped to handle. Nobody is equipped to handle that. You want to see like the result of like what fame does to people. Like one of our most beloved actors in America is Tom Cruise, right? He gave us Top Gun, gave us all the Mission Impossible movies, and he's a beloved actor. Everybody loves Tom Cruise, but it's like, look at that guy, right? Look at the arc of that guy's life. I mean, he was a wrestler in high school. His dad was a race car driver, so he's got that sort of thing to ground him out. But like, he's off in Scientology land. And what's really bizarre is that like Tom Cruise actually has a lot to offer outside of his ability to recite his lines and hit his marks and all that stuff. Like he's very well educated when it comes to nutrition and all that sort of thing. And but like he lives in a bizarre world where he cannot go outside alone. Tom Cruise cannot walk into a Starbucks and order a coffee. He would be attacked. People love him so much that they would tear the skin from his body in an effort to remove some of his clothes, so that people lose their minds around famous people, and therefore the famous people have to recluse themselves, right? They have to become reclusive, and then that has an effect on them. That's why those people are weird. That's how you get Scientologists, right? That's why Scientology is just a bunch of, rich people that are like actors, like rich people that didn't actually have to invent anything to get rich. You know what I mean? Fame is not natural. And it doesn't have, it's not like, I used to talk about this on the cryptocurrency show, like, people are always talking about like, I want a Lamborghini. It's like, okay, all right, slow down. Why? Why do you want a Lamborghini? Are you a race car driver? No? Okay, well, you do know that a Lamborghini is a race car. It's not like a normal car. It has 600 horsepower. Have you ever driven anything that has that much horsepower? No. Okay, then you think this thing is going to make you happy, but one of the very first things that you're going to learn when you go and spend $250,000 on this fine automobile, and it is a fine automobile. But the first thing that you're going to learn is that you are way out of your own class. You don't know how to drive that car. And the second thing that you're going to learn is that one thing about cars that perform like that, they require an insane amount of upkeep, because that car has 600 and whatever horsepower. It means it burns a lot hotter. And thermodynamics, the laws of thermodynamics kick in, and the next thing you know, it's like you're replacing pistons and crankshafts, and you know what I mean? Like, it's very expensive. And if you took just a little bit of time, like you would understand. It's like, if you buy that car, like, you're going to look like a weirdo. just like Tom Cruise looks like a weirdo every time he gets every time he gets out in public, he gets on Oprah Winfrey and starts jumping up and down on the couches. It's like, that's what you're gonna look like. Because you know what I mean? Like you were not built to be famous. We all want to be famous, but it's like, I do too. But I know enough. It's like, look, I know exactly what I want. When it comes to like this podcast, I need 20,000 downloads a month, right? And that's all really I want. I want 20,000 people to listen to my podcast. It's not, Joe Rogan's got 6 million, so I know that asking for 20,000 is not very much to ask for. Because with that amount of people, it's like, that's manageable. I can run a few commercials. I can make enough money to feed my family and put a roof over their head and all that other stuff. Like I don't want Adam Carolla and Joe Rogan fame. Not that I would ever have that, but I'm just saying, like I wouldn't want that because it changes people. And it's you don't get a voice in the matter, right? You don't get to choose. If you become famous, it's like you will change. You have to. Because you're being put into different circumstances. It's just like, look, you drove your Ford to work today. You drove your Tercel. Or you drove your, station wagon, your BMW station wagon, or whatever it is that you did not drive a Lamborghini to work today. And if tomorrow you drive a Lamborghini to work, you're going to notice that things are very different. And it will change you. Probably not for the better. And so here's Jordan B. Peterson, who just all of a sudden, he's world famous, super rich, right? I mean, his book is what, $30? And he sold, I don't know, 1 million of them? Minus 50% to your agent, your, whatever. That's $15 million, yo. That's a lot of money if you didn't already have it. I'm just spitballing the numbers here, but all of a sudden this guy's thrust into wealth, and all of a sudden he's famous. In his in his scurry to try to maintain it all, he goes to the largest celebrity agency, place where you go get an agent, CAA, and he goes and he gets himself an agent. Who, by the way, agents, they tend to take 15%, and he joins this group where it's, the two Weinstein brothers and, knucklehead, Sam Harris, and the gay Jewish guy, Dave Rubin. So all of a sudden he's hanging out with a gay dude, a couple of liberals, and, just this guy that always looks, Sam Harris, every time I see his face, I'm like, please, Sam Harris, don't kill yourself. That look on your face, that tells me you're contemplating suicide. Like, your deep dive into nihilism is like, you're this close, dude. That look on your face, I've seen that before. I've seen it on other people, and I've seen it in the mirror. I know that look, and Sam Harris looks like a guy who's about to open up a vein. And that's who Jordan B. Peterson, in his haste, decided to hang out with. So he goes and he gets himself an agent, and he starts hanging out with a bunch of bedwetting liberals. Literal cocksuckers. Right? I mean, listen, I love Dave Rubin, but let's face it, man. Like he's a dude who's into other dudes. That's who Jordan Peterson has been hanging out with for the last year and a half. You don't think that's going to change you? It's going to twist your it's going to distort your view of reality. So yeah, it's like, look, I don't. The people that are the most disappointed in him, it's like, well, what were you looking for? Right? Were you looking for a father figure? Well, you were looking in the wrong place. Right? I'm very happy with Jordan B. Peterson's work up until this point, because it's been all about that. It's like, look, you need to get in contact with the Father. And I'm all for that, but at no point has Jordan B. Peterson ever said, like, I'm going to be, I'm going to start teaching you about Jesus Christ. I'm going to start teaching you, like, how to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. And he never said, like, I'm going to run for office and I'm going to fix the political system. He never said he was going to. He never talked about those things. So I never expected it from him. So it's like, if he wants to go off into weirdo land and talk about, like, oh, I think Brett Kavanaugh ought to step down. It's like, well, I don't really care what you think about that, Dr. Peterson. That's not what I've hired you for. When I sent you that $30 for your book, I was hiring you to speak to me on a particular matter. I don't want to hear your thoughts on Brett Kavanaugh, and I don't want to hear Stefan Molyneux telling me how I could be a more effective follower of Jesus Christ, right? Unless he's waving the white flag saying, hey, everybody, let me give you this new take that I have on the first temptation of Jesus Christ. Keep in mind, I'm an atheist. And that's how he starts his conversation off. He's like, hey, everybody, just keep in mind, I'm an atheist. Right? This isn't exactly something I talk about very often. That's how it's done. You know what I mean? Like, that's respect. It's like, okay, Stefan Molyneux, thank you for the waving the white flag. Appreciate you. I will now hear you. So, look, I understand Owen Benjamin's disappointment, and I understand, like, the way that he's seeing, it's like, this can go very badly because he's turning into a socialist. I can see that. That's a very valid concern. The money's gotten to him, and he hasn't, probably more, the money and the fame. It's a lot to handle, and that kind of thing. That's how you get Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey was a Canadian. And, he worked hard his whole life, and all of a sudden, he's a bazillionaire, and he's one of the highest paid actors there is. And the next thing you know, after that, he goes on Bill Maher, and he's talking about, well, I think everybody should be a socialist. It's like, well, of course you do. Like, even though you've struggled very hard, like, the fact is that, like, it doesn't matter how hard you've struggled. You're not worth a $20 million check for showing up and working on a movie set for 4 months. Nobody's worth that. The amount of work that you put in doesn't equal, like, the amount of pay that you receive. So, of course, in your mind, you think, well, why doesn't everybody have a $20 million check? Obviously, if they gave me a $20 million check, they can just give everybody a one. That's the significance of, like, the amount of money that you make should be somehow correlated to the amount of work that you put into it. There's a new book out right now called Bullshit Jobs. And it's about exactly that. Like, over the last few decades, like, we've created a lot of different industries, like mostly in the financial industry, but we have all these jobs that just pay gobs of money, but it's like, yeah, but really all you're doing is you're just spinning the hamster wheel, man. You're not actually creating anything. There's a lot of jobs out there like that. I used to have one of those jobs, by the way. Not as a commodity trader, but other things. But you know what I mean? Like, it distorts the mind. And now all of a sudden, Jordan Peterson's a multi-millionaire and his face is on everything and he's flying around the world. It's like, yeah, he's going to be a different dude. Probably not for the best. But let's, on our end, as individuals, let's just try to keep it in perspective. That's what I was saying. Anyways, that's the show for today. Just some thoughts, man. Like, again, we are in perilous times. These are weird, weird times, right? The left just had another massive blow to their power structure. And just like when you kick over an anthill, the ants don't go running into the ground, but they come out and they start attacking. That's what the left is doing right now. They're showing even more that they are truly not the peaceful people that they pretended to be just 2 years ago. They are the most violent, most vile, rapiest, most racist. I mean, they truly are the evil people. And more they're showing that. And so it does get disturbing when a guy like Jordan B. Peterson starts going all loony left on us, because it's like, damn it, we needed that guy. But no, you didn't. No, you didn't. You needed God. And you still do. You need to know the truth. The truth will set you free, and you need to know the truth, and nobody else can tell it to you, except for one. The Almighty himself. Like, do you know? It doesn't matter to you. Does it? Does it matter to you to know the truth? Is there a God or not? Will he speak to me or not? Do you want to know the answers to those questions? I'm telling you. Only the Almighty, if there is such a thing, can answer those questions for you. And you will not know the answer unless you get it from that source. You must know. And if you want to see Jesus talking about that very same concept, it's in the Book of John chapter 17. You must know. Belief is good, but belief has to carry you into the place of knowing. You must know the Almighty. Jordan Peterson's not going to help you. Billy Graham, Chuck, what's his name? Chuck Smith. You know, the Dalai Lama, Creflo Dollar, those charlatans. What's the guy? You know, Joel Osteen. These people can't tell you. Nobody can tell you. If you want to know the truth about something, you're going to have to find out. That's the show for today. Thank you, everybody, for joining in. If you want to support the show, it's archadvocate.com, arch-advocate.com. And if you send me a PayPal, make sure to leave a message, and I'll read it on the show. If you want to become a monthly Patreon supporter, leave a message there as well, and I will read that on the show, thus making you famous and turning you into a weirdo. See how that works? Boom! Enjoy yourselves. Talk to you tomorrow.